welcome to this, another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and today I'm speaking with Jordan T. Parrott, the DP of the film that just played at Sundance called Chaperone. It's a short film starring Zachary Quinto, and it's I don't know if the phrase "it's a banger" is appropriate for the film, but it's a great one. So if you're able to find a way to see it, highly recommended. This is a great one. You know, me and Jordan talk a lot about sort of the psychology of filmmaking almost, stillness and considered frames. You know, obviously like we always do, the film school question comes up. I swear to God, I'm going to stop talking about it. The idea of mini DV, or coming up on mini DV rather, film, that kind of thing, digital cinematography. It's just a good one. It's just another great one. I maintain there are no bad podcasts on this podcast yet. So that's it. I'm going to let you go ahead and listen to it. So here's my conversation with Jordan Parrott. How did you get started at, not in cinematography as a job, but just like what got you into image making? Were you always kind of a visual guy, or were you more kind of happened into it?
I'll say I've always been a visual kind of person, and my mother tells a story of how, like, anytime she was holding me as a baby walking down the hallway, if a frame that she had on the wall was slightly askew, I'd be crying until she fixed it and leveled it out. Growing up, I never saw cinematography as an actual tangible, or even knew about it as a job. I think what really got me into it was like video class in high school was fun. I'm like, I could do this. And then when I went to college at Emerson, I kind of just threw myself every weekend onto a student project or like a music video. And then on the very first weekend project was a music video. I remember being an electrician. I didn't even know what that meant. But I remember seeing whatever DP was doing in the music video was like, oh, I like that. That looks interesting to me. And seeing how they're logistically creating the look and managing the whole team to get what they want. So that's kind of when I attached myself to it. And around the same time, too, I was watching a lot of Sergio Leone, and I love Sergio Leone. I think, like, Once Upon a Time in the West, I fell in love with it, and just building tension from silence was something I always really gravitated towards when it comes to the image and cinematography. Yeah.
What type of, when you got started on that music video, what type of like budget are we talking? What
I don't know. This was like, out of the Boston scene, at least, this is, between 2004, 2007, 08.
So like the height of mini DV.
Yeah, exactly. It was mini HDV. Like mini HDV was a new thing, I think 06, 08, 07. So it was like the adapters weren't even out yet, like the PS Technic or the VS adapter. So it was all mini DV. And the tungsten, like it was like normal tungsten RA lights or mole lights. It was nothing crazy. Maybe a Kino flow and stuff like that. Yeah, it was small. I remember like the clubs that you did for the music videos, like they had a little bit allocated for certain weekends for certain music videos.
What do you mean, like a bar club or like a visual?
No, so it's like the college
club?
had AV club essentially.
Gotcha.
The college had many different clubs. Had a film club, had a video club, and had a few other different things in between.
Gotcha. Because I remember in high school, same thing, regular DV. Around that time, couldn't find, just because I lived in a town of 5,000 people, so there were no film lights. And I remember a local college got, I don't even think they were RE or mole. I think they were just like, I think they were theater lights. I think we're doing all like Lecos. They're like, you can use these, and we just didn't know, they didn't have diffusion or anything. So we were like, we're not spotlighting everybody, and we were too dumb to think about bouncing. So we were just like, yeah, fuck it, we'll just shoot jackass videos. That was basically how it started. So at Emerson, what was their film program like? Was it any good, or did you kind of have to like make your own way? Because my college was brand new to the project.
Was it? Yeah, I'm curious to hear about your experience. With Emerson, it was a very competitive school, which I liked. It helped me kind of rise to the occasion, and I needed that. It was really good. what I say about Emerson is that, or it's really any film school, because you get the question a lot, like, oh, is film school worth it? Especially if it's like worth the money. In the back of my head, I'm like, no, it's kind of not, but it is what you make of it. And I don't regret doing it. But for most people, when I get that question, I'm like, suss it out. You can easily get on set and do your own thing and pay your own way. And I think any film school is, you learn a lot from your peers, right? Sure, you have the professors kind of guiding you, and hopefully you learn a lot from them. And if you don't, you do have the peer-to-peer learning experience there about essentially fucking up or making mistakes together,
right,
on a low-stakes thing, and making something beautiful out of those mistakes. And what I found out shortly after, graduating, and still to this day, is that is how most learning does happen. It is peer-to-peer. It is from your fellow friends, your fellow technicians, and all that. So that's my general quip about college and film school. How was it for you? And where did you go?
I went to Arizona State, and when I got there, so not a film school, and when I got there, their film program had just started. Apparently now it's actually like awesome. But when we, apparently the president told a friend of mine that like, it's awesome on the back of us. And I was like, oh, so we just wrecking balled our way through it. And then they figured out like, oh, we should not be doing this anymore. But at the time too, like it was the only cameras they had were DVXs, and they had like a couple 5Ds and one Red about the time I was a senior. And so everyone had to fight for that. And of course it was like whoever the guy in charge of that's favorite person was got that.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
And, but same thing. I didn't know cinematography was like where I wanted. I was just in film school. This is where I say that like film school is worth it. Is I knew I wanted to get into filmmaking. I had already gone to New York Film. I feel like I say this exact set of things every episode. So anyone who listens a lot's probably like, we fucking know, dude. But I had gone to the New York Film Academy like summer program, and that had really put me on like a good path. And I thought that was very worth it. I learned a lot, but also was around very creative people. Going to Arizona State's film school at the time, and 08 to 12, was a lot of fun. And not everyone was super committed to film. Some people were just there to goof off, And so I would say it was valuable in that I had experiences that I didn't learn until afterwards taught me exactly what you were saying. Like, oh, you have to step up. Oh, I was able to make mistakes. Like you were saying, mistakes are where you learn, not successes. And I think so I think the whole college experience, I think, was worth it for me more so than that specific film school.
Right.
But looking back on it, I should have like met more people or, focused on it, but I think that's valuable education, because it's true, at least in my experience in the film world too, is like, if you don't, try, like nothing's going to be fucking handed to you. So you have to go in and start like making your own path the same way you would in film school. Yeah,
I definitely second all that. Did you have film at your college?
No. We shot 16 mil at NIFA, but yeah, they
got it. Okay.
Which that was super valuable.
Yeah, it is. I was right. Probably the, college classes 04 to 08, we still had film and mostly did learn film. And that was extremely valuable. And I kind of missed that of the whole process of it. Like coming into class and be like, okay, I know what film is, but what exactly is it? How do you use it? How do you expose for it? All that stuff. And I speak to, friends that actually went to the same college, and they're like 4, 6, or even 8 years younger at this point. And they didn't, they still did learn a lot of film, but they kind of like their secondary or third, what we call film 2, film 3s. They have other classes like that are more video oriented than film.
Right.
So they did that more instead of the film, which is like upsetting to me, but it's kind of how things have gone in general. So
what about shooting film do you carry on into your digital cinematography work?
Metering, mostly metering. I still use false color, and it's a tool, and I'm actually using it a lot less. I kind of,
I still got mine.
Yeah, exactly. I have the dual, and I love spot metering, just staying behind camera, spot metering. So that's probably the biggest thing. they're very different mediums. So exposing for them are very different, but I've carried on just at least metering and keeping it in my head for consistency's sakes.
Yeah. A lot of the DPs I've talked to have mentioned metering as being like more of a sanity check, or they end up just relying on false color because it is technically more accurate for your sensor,
It is. Yeah. And, between Venice and ours and all the systems, like the false color is always a little different. So getting used to that if I'm like switching for a body that I'm not typically used to, false color is super handy for handheld, especially if I'm doing the handhold holding shots. So that's nice to have as a quick check because I can't always just check on my meter. Or if I'm outside in sunlight, I can't trust the monitor directly in front of me if I'm not using the eyepiece at least. And I tend not to use the eyepiece. So that's where I kind of rely mostly on false color.
What's funny is I've been a monitor guy by not necessity, but just like I don't own an eyepiece and they're so fucking expensive now for these digital cameras. And I own a C500 Mark II and the Canon eyepiece is $5,000. It's like I could buy a C70 for one of those. And so I'm always just like, man, I wish I could have an eyepiece. Grass is always greener. I'm like, someone get me an eyepiece for Christmas.
They are nice. They're getting really nice. I got
the
to
LF one is nice.
The which one?
The LF, the RELF eyepiece.
Oh yes,
super
it is
nice.
really nice. I just played with the Venice 2 right before the new year. I got it on a commercial before it got released, and it's really nice. It keeps getting better. It keeps getting better and better.
Talk to me about like your sort of inspirations that led to your initial sort of let's say aesthetic choices. Like when you were first getting started, like what were you trying to sort of emulate? Or were you more of a free spirit? There's plenty of those guys who are just like, I was doing whatever I felt.
No, it's definitely not a free spirit. Or maybe there's a balance to it.
Certainly.
I do, like I said earlier, I do lean towards the films that speak, that carry tension with little dialogue and having the weight hold on the actors and also cinematography and possibly the sound design, or the sound design being silent helps that tension. Yeah. I think one of the films I remember seeing, I was young and I didn't know I was going to go into movies yet, was Road to Perdition. And I visited that film back after getting into movies like years and years ago. They were talking about college, and I fell in love with that. And I think a lot of it is the beautiful blocking and the incredible lighting that Conrad Hall did. And unfortunately, that was his final film. I think that is always something in the back of my head that I try to emulate, is those very precise blocking and framing, but particularly with lighting. And having the right contrast of moody, but not too dark. It doesn't fall too much into darkness when it's not appropriate. They use silhouettes very poignantly and not too much. Like the silhouette does mean a lot. It's not overdone in a film. I can't say I'm too much of a free spirit. I think on set, there's always an element of if something's not going quite right, or it's not what you're thinking of, and you kind of have to pivot in your head, there is some element in trying to follow your gut to fix it, right, and break away from what you're thinking of what you had in your mind's eye. Yeah.
Did you, did that sort of, appreciation of stillness and sort of maybe, I suppose, proscenium look, did that help, sort of push you towards learning about composition faster than anything else? Because I know that's something that doesn't really get, these days, composition isn't really taught that much. It's always like lighting and camera and now like cool lenses, but no one's ever just talking about like literally the frame.
It goes hand in hand. Sorry, something just popped up. It goes hand in hand. Actually, it's a good question. It's funny because I don't think lighting is that taught, at least when I was coming up. It's like I definitely gravitated towards the lighting side, and I was a gaffer and electrician on the indie scene in New York for about 6 years before like making the jump to DP. But there's this steadiness in finding the frame. Whether you're in prep, you're like, okay, this is the frame. You saw location, hopefully. and you're like, okay, this is what conveys a message of like solitude, or particularly in this film that I have in Sundance, like the feeling of dread and heavy weight and depression, right? So you speak in detail and prep. You're like, how do we display that in this room, in this empty, vacant room? And how do you center weight them, or do you have them off to the side slightly as the film progresses to show that sparseness happening around them? But when you set the camera, you don't move it much. I think there's a beautiful thing that can happen is that this is it. This is your blocking. It's here. The camera maybe moves a little bit, nothing crazy. And then you light to that, you know,
right.
And you're always in prep trying to figure out how do you light for that frame before getting there. But there is a meditation in lighting for that frame, and you knowing that frame is not going to move or move too much. And I like that, because then you can focus on if there is blocking towards camera, away from camera, how they come in and out of light, you know, and you see it, opposed to doing a bit more handheld, a bit more movement, you're moving with them. So that lighting change might be less felt, which is a beautiful thing too. It just depends what you're going for. But I tend to like to feel a shift in lighting within a scene through blocking.
Yeah. Well, and it just makes low key, it kind of makes your job a lot easier too. Because if you know the camera's not going to move, you're like, I'm going to get this, you know, piece of diffusion just right there, you know.
You could come in super close and make it softer, or whatever. There is definitely something to that. Yeah. You know, I don't do that on my commercial work because then if I get a note to make it wider, I'm like, okay. Yeah. My commercial work, I always go actually 2 to 3 feet wider in my framing, or at least lighting wise. So I have space. That way, if I get a note that they want to widen it out, I'm clear from that. But in my narrative work, yes, you kind of push the limits quite a bit with that.
Yeah. Actually, it's great you bring that up for me. I'm trying to get more into commercial work now. And I was wondering if you had any tips on how to maybe make one's reel get into the right hands, or if reels are even necessary anymore. And then 2, kind of just like commercial, the differences between commercial and narrative work that one must be aware of when we're working with clients that want to get this shit done yesterday.
Essentially, I'll talk about experience and difference first. A lot of commercials I do they're comedy commercials. They're a lot of fun, and I have phenomenal directors that I do them with, and they've become close friends. I have, you know, a few. So those sets are like letting the scene, more static movement or very little movement, and just letting the actors play with it, because only 15, 30-second spots. So it's got to be really tight. And if you add too much movement, I learned early on years ago that the movement essentially gets cut out, or it makes the cut a little jarring because it's only 15 seconds. You know, it could be 12 seconds with the end title bumper. A lot of my commercials just speaking to the comedy between mostly 2 or 3 or 4 actors playing in a scene together. It's fairly simple. But where I try to get a little, not too fancy with it, but it's the lighting. I could have a little bit more fun with, or just play with hard light versus soft light in certain instances. My work is not quite that super moody, dark look of either sports or other kind of genre of commercials. So one of the tricks I do is, mindset going to commercials, always give room to your lighting. So if you get the note about being wider, you could go wider. It's a lot of safety. It's always, I think commercials, it's a lot of safety. It's you don't know if something's not working quite the right way, if something could change on you. I haven't had anything change like crazy. Like I've never had to switch the room 180. It's always been set, approved by agency and board. It's like, this is the angle, this is the shot, you know. At most I'm moving and shifting like a few feet here and there from a close up, left or right. And then when it comes to reels, I can't tell you. Like getting reels or getting into it. It really is, you know, I've been put up for jobs I haven't got. I've been put up for the jobs from directors, which is great. But sometimes, you know, and sometimes rightfully so, the agency doesn't go with me. And they go with someone else. And that happens. And it's just become a process of learning to accept that. It could be whatever reason they don't accept me. It could be something totally unrelated to my talent or what they see in my work. Or honestly, it could be the director sometimes. Maybe they want to try someone new. It doesn't have any harsh feelings in our relationship. It's just like, oh, someone else available, like to try them. And, that happens quite a bit. So it was a lot of learning to not take that personally.
Yeah.
And that obviously happens on narratives, features, shows, and stuff like that. But I've had that happen to me a lot in commercials. I understand there's an extra layer with commercials. So that was probably the biggest thing to learn over the last 6-7 years when it comes to commercial work. They look at least I know with my directors that put me out for it, I think their production companies they go to my site, I think, and they send like 3 to 4 examples of my work of commercials. They don't send a reel, nor do I have a commercial reel, and I don't think they ever send my narrative reel. I think they just send like some commercials I've done either with that director and without that director to see if I get approval.
Yeah. Yeah, because it does feel like in some cases, I felt this, and I know a few of my friends have, that like you spend a lot of effort making a really cool reel, and then it just does not get seen. And on the one hand, like who the fuck cares if it gets 1 million views on like YouTube or whatever, because those aren't people that are going to hire you anyway. But it does feel like the exercise of building the reel takes a lot of creative energy, and then it's like not even going to get used.
It does. Yeah, you're so at the whim of others and in this industry as a whole. Yeah. And you try to make your way and try to do stuff that they're like, okay, you have to go out and do it. But those little defeats could add up and get you down. It's just trudging through it.
I think if anything, I think your longevity is entirely built upon not getting bummed out. Just like shit happens, man. Like you got to move on.
It was interesting perspective recently. I actually started writing in 2020, pandemic, that whole thing. I haven't done any creative writing in like over a decade. And I wrote a few short scripts. I've gone a lot better thanks to my lovely girlfriend who hammered in the grammar and the active tense and all that. She made me a lot better writer. I'm still working on it. But I wrote a few. I like a bunch of them. And last July, I ended up with a good friend of mine, Johan, co-directing one of them.
Oh, cool.
But it was a really cool experience to keep my creative juices flowing, just to be like, okay, I could write this, I could create this and have complete control over it. So that revitalized me quite a bit. What I learned is in the casting process, because I've never done a casting process before, was how you look at certain things or what you look for. And when you get all these actors doing self-tapes, they can be fucking phenomenal. And it's just something is like not quite the character you saw, something like that. So that taught me about like when other people view my work or from up for approval, it's like, oh, okay. Like I saw a bunch of casts that was great. And I was like, this person has this little comedic beat just slightly better. It doesn't mean they're like less talented. So that gave me a fresh perspective on how like other people see my work, approve or decline my work when it comes to like approvals.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Mm-hmm.
So in your mind, would it be better to make a few spec commercials if most people are going to be looking at examples of work? Because obviously, like the first job you're going to get is going to come off the back of one of those examples.
Yeah,
if it were a real one.
I'd say spec commercials. Like keep it cheap though. I wouldn't go like crazy spec, like spending thousands upon $1,000, maybe like a few thousand or $1,000 or $2,000. Honestly, interesting situation. Well, I'll make a long story short. I met with a person that's a neighbor actually, and we found out we're neighbors in both kind of the industry. He's more of a photographer kind of guy, but does cinematography and directing work. And my favorite commercial he told me was a spec commercial he shot on 8mm film. And he just went out with like, it was a shoe. I think it was like maybe an Adidas type thing. He just went out with 8mm camera and a model and shot a bunch of stuff and it looked great. And I thought it was a great work. So I think that is how you could do it on a very cheap, give it a good aesthetic with film or 16mm, shooting on Bolex, if it has light flare, go with it. Stuff like that. I would keep it cheap, keep it creative and cheap. Go with the grain.
Yeah.
Go with all the mistakes, make it a part of the edit.
People pay so much to add that shit now.
They do. I mean, everyone I know is adding grain and color. I mean, I add grain and color all the time now. I've learned that I don't use softening filters in my work anymore because I know the level of grain I like to add in color.
Yeah, I don't. I've completely almost bailed. I mean, I shoot full frame now, so I guess I've noticed that there's like a kind of a smoothness to it already. But yeah, I've completely ditched diffusion filters almost completely.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, I like my certain cocktail with either Cook Anamorphics with a classic soft, or I'm trying to think Leicas I might use more with a Hollywood Black or something, which is always a good default to have. Like if someone in front of camera needs just a little bit of it, or if the lighting's harsher, a lot of times that comes into it, and it's not soft light, you kind of just take that out. But yeah, when it comes to at least super 35 sensors, I'm currently not using too much or any diffusion. My full framework, I think once I get to that 85 millimeter or essentially over 55 millimeter, I am using like an eighth of something if it's a close up.
Yeah. I find, because I color most of my own stuff, which was really a pandemic thing where I was coloring all my own stuff in general, but I was like, well, I can't leave the house. I might as well get good at this because people pay a lot of money for it. Yeah. And I ended up coloring 2 features, which was nice. But I mean, they're indie features, but still. But I found that like there are ways to get nearly the same look. I used to say no. I used to say there's no way to get the same look of a glass filter in post. I used to be staunch about that. And now having played with it a lot, I'm like, you can get pretty fucking close.
I'd be curious to see comparisons on that. I'd be really curious about comparisons on that.
You know what? The HDR panel in Resolve, which is not specific for HDR, it just means that you can control areas more granularly. The contrast slider in there works more like sensor contrast and less like the wheel contrast. So you can really flatten out your image, but then the colors react as if you were exposing them at those exposure levels.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So if you, I'd have to show it to you for it to make sense. But like if you like level the contrast out to where there's just enough where it still looks like a good image, and then you use any of the sort of mid-tone detail tools, there's like a handful of them, you can get like a nice kind of bloom or anything like that.
It's interesting. I'll have to look into this. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's cool.
I'm still thinking of like, the optical of what I use is usually 1/8 of something. In my head, it can't be redone in post, but I'm curious to look into this.
I mean, there's definitely going to be ones that can't.
Oh, of course.
But I was surprised to see anything get replicated,
Yeah. Well, it's also, if it's only like the tiniest amount off and it's close to it, it's like, can our eyes even perceive it at that point of a difference?
Yeah. Well, there is something obviously to be said about confidence. If you like putting the 1/8 of anything in front of your lens and it makes you feel like you're getting the image you want, better to have that than not have it and constantly have that in the back of your head going like, well, what if,
That's true. That's a very good point. I didn't think of it that way.
For some reason, I'm always thinking about like the psychology of what our choices do, because I was talking to this one YouTuber. His name's Sawyer Hartman. I was reviewing the Canon C70, and they wanted me to talk to him because he's got 2 million subscribers and loves the C70. So kind of a traditional YouTuber. And I was like, he apparently came off the 5D Mark IV or something like that. And he was like, once I got the C70, man, I just started shooting like more like my cinema camera, because he had a Red. And I was like, what do you mean you started shooting more like your, like, what does that mean? And he goes like, well, I started like lighting it different. I started using my primes. I started doing all this. And I was like, oh, so it had nothing to, I didn't say this to him, but I was like, so you're telling me that you could have done all this with your DSLR. You just didn't. But now that you had a quote unquote cinema camera, like it felt it, the psychology of it made him want to light the thing or want to use primes or want to compose better.
Oh, interesting. I never thought of that as a layer.
Yeah, no, me neither, until he said that. And I was like, that's because I was so stumbled by it. Like I had to ask him like 3 times, like, what do you mean you shot more like your cinema camera? What does that mean? And he kept saying stuff that he could have done either way. But it was the confidence that the camera gave it.
Right. You're like, what's the point of doing it on the smaller system? Because it's only going to look to whatever 10th degree it is compared to this cinema. We're like, oh, I could actually do the thing and make it look better. Oh, that's interesting. I never would have thought of that.
Well, and I think too, like it, I'll include you in the you and I. Like the biggest technology advances I remember seeing were 24p, shooting to SD cards, and interchangeable lenses. Like everything past that has been just like a dream.
Yeah.
You know, like shooting on a DVX wasn't like, wow, fuck it, we can't light it. It was, you know, it was like, we got to really try to make this look good.
You had to light it. I remember shooting that thing all throughout college and try to light it. The latitude was awful, obviously. But
Yeah. You had like 3 stops. You had your key, 1 under and 1 over.
It was essentially like color reversal film.
Yeah.
It was like no latitude, but you know, it was a learning experience. I mean, the music video I mentioned first, I think that was shot on a DVX.
Yeah. I still have my XL2.
Damn. Oh yeah. I shot on that a bunch. Yeah.
About the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about your time as a gaffer, how did that inform your cinematography, or not specifically your cinematography, but you as a cinematographer?
Yeah. I think about that a lot. How did my gaffing years? It was, sometimes I miss it. I definitely gravitate more towards the lighting side and love geeking out about, honestly, lighting side more than camera side, to be honest. It's a part of my style. You know, it's a large part of it that kicked my ass. You know, it's in DC and in New York doing electrical gaffing work. But it was a blast. It was fun. I met great people all throughout the years. Learned the intricacies of obviously running a G&E department, which are extraordinarily valuable, especially when I come into a new project currently and I don't know the gaffer or key grip. I have a quicker shorthand with him, knowing a little bit more of the minutia of the departments and the gear. That helps significantly. You know, things have changed so much since even I stopped doing it like 7 or 8 years ago. Now, like I stopped doing it before LEDs were really a big thing. So now it's even like an extra layer that I don't know about. A little bit more removed from it, at least. It's I think it helps me save time on set having in the background of coming from the lighting side or electrical side of it. Either just knowing if a big unit's worth the time to set up and do that whole thing with the power run and everything, or if I could do it on a smaller unit inside and that kind of comparison basis. Or, you know, talking with the gaffer of planning with it and essentially trying to think of backtracking now. I mean, I'll sum it up. All in all, it was a super great experience. I'm glad I did it. You know, I did it for 6 years. It was a blast. I learned a lot. I did find my lighting style throughout those years of working with other DPs. I mean, like, okay, I could take this. I like this. I don't like this, how this was done. I like this kind of bounce. Soft silver is one of my favorite things to bounce into. Or Roscoe had a pebble kind of soft silver that was slightly different than I love, like tiny things like that.
That's huge.
And it is like learning your materials. I mean, everyone does it now, but when I was gaffing a bunch, like silk was still a thing where everyone goes grids now. You know, no one touches the silk. You know, 1/8 silk for an overhead is nice because they don't make that thin of a grid. So, you know, learning your flavors in that regard, or even deciding when to book light versus a direct light, even if you want the direct light to be soft, is super valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. I'll try to think more of that. I usually, because I think about that a lot, so I always go back and forth. Like I think if those 6 years were well spent, actually I should say this too. Knowing and coming from those 6 years of doing the work, I know how I would like to think, and hopefully I just keep it always in mind, how hard the crew works and how much power it takes to even just run power lines on a big system.
Yeah.
and stuff like that, and keeping that always aware in the back of my head when I make an ask, whether it's for an 18K or more than one 18K, and how that affects how much work that is to do.
I was going to say, now that you're on the other side of it, so to speak, do you like kind of limit yourself on the purchase sheet or the rental sheet? Like, all right, don't get crazy. Or as a DP, you're like, now I get to go for 18Ks, you know?
Yeah, I know.
52 space lights.
Yeah, and I'm always a little cognizant of it. It depends on the size of the project. You know, obviously indies, you're always going to have to be like, cutting the budget, you know, just making it work. And that's the beautiful thing about LEDs. They're so versatile that you can do that now with LEDs. And you can make an indie feature on at least a small lighting package and make it look great, with combination of these digital sensors being so powerful with latitude.
Yeah.
You know, on my higher budget stuff or the commercials, I try not to worry about it as much. But then again, I think my mentality is like, well, I'm 90 to 95% confident I'm not going to use that thing. So why put on the order?
Sure.
You know, it's the extra thing to not think about by not having it there. Sometimes I actually do find that advantageous.
Limitations can be freeing.
Right. So it's like, so yeah, I worry about it less in the higher budget stuff, but it is always kind of there. It's like, at the same time, I think it's a New York mentality because we don't have much space out here. Like, and every time I work in LA and they have all the space in the world, it's great. And it's like adding an extra 18K or even a 6K in the truck is not that big of a deal. Where in New York, it's a pain in the ass. And then even getting up to location or wherever on the street, it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's split, but I'm still cognizant of it.
Sure. That actually is a great dovetail into Chaperone, because it looks, obviously it's an indie short, but
yes.
It looks incredibly natural. So I'm wondering, my first thought throughout the whole thing was like, because I had looked at your IMDb and I saw a shit ton of the gaffer stuff, and I'm like, how much gaffing were you doing, or was it was it kind of what you see is what you get, or more grip heavy?
It's a nice flux of everything. It depends on the scene. I take it as a compliment, being like, oh, it looks very naturalistic. And a lot of times it takes a lot of work to get that natural.
Meant as a compliment.
Yeah. But a lot of people outside of the industry don't like natural. Means not much work was done for it, but we kind of know that making it look natural actually is sometimes really tough in a space, and it's a lot of work. It's more of us diffusing or hiding things, and it's a lot more stuff. So with Chaperone, it's a lot of it is natural in the sense of like it is natural light, because I have a lot of driving stuff that is just daylight. It's all composition. It's all like hostess tray or vice versa of rigs, and then once we move inside, it's a little bit of shaping for that daytime. I'm going through the scenes in my head. And then once you get to nighttime, it was very little. There's at least a shot going out with, or two shots going out right now of still images of, one's of Zachary Quinto, and it's just black behind him. That's a still. And the reverse of that is actually public now. That is of Russell, our actor, in his lap, and the chaperone's hand around him. Yeah, that's as simple as Sam Axe, the director. They wanted, those like Coleman LED lamps for camping. Yep. It was that high. I had a 4x bounce with muslin on it, and just kicked it back at their faces, and that's it. That is it. So you get a little bit of the harsh quality of that Coleman, the LED light, because it's a weird kind of LED. It shoots down into it like a reflective mirror. And then all of it was bounce. And then maybe I did add like a Helios or an LED, a battery power, just a little bit of fill into that bounce. And
everyone loves the tubes. Every single DP. This is the 40th episode. I think 40 times I've heard everyone say they use the tubes.
You can't beat the Titans or the Helios tubes. They really, the Pixel tubes was a nice foray into the Titan tubes, and they really nailed it with the Titan tubes. I mean, they're great. I have them on almost everything. They were also on this one. There's a scene, a dancing scene with the two actors, and that we went more mustardy, kind of unease yellow. And my gaffer Luke had the new Nix bulbs by Astera. that you plug in. And those were all we used. That plus the Heliosaur Titan for a little extra fill. And we just match the color and obviously the whole system. And that's really it. And then I had a little bit going on elsewhere, but for the main scene, it was that. So for this film, it was mostly keeping it small, contained, given time and space for the actors to do their thing, especially with the director's sound, and making it moody and creating the feel from that. So negative fill played a large part of it too.
Yeah. Talk to me about how you, I suppose, expose the camera, quote unquote, for color. Because that's become kind of an interesting topic now that you can, set it to fucking 42.5, some people go, it's 56 the whole time. It's a film stock, or, get wild with it.
I keep it simple. For daytime interiors and exteriors in my 5600. If the house or wherever you're shooting is shady, or if you're in the shade outside, I do put at 7,000 Kelvin, so you keep the warmth and the coolness kind of balances out. And honestly, otherwise, nighttime interior exterior at 3200. I don't mess with it too much from there. I just, if it's a warmer thing, I make my lighting warmer and I keep it kind of a balanced stock like that regard. The in between, I really only do if I'm in a fluorescent situation. Then I'm like, okay, doing that 4300, cutting the green out with my lights if I can't replace the tubes up high. So I'm pretty basic on that.
Okay, yeah. I recently got a color meter, and I'm just a huge nerd. So I fucking metered every bulb in the house, every bulb I could find in a drawer. I'm actually, a buddy of mine's helped me develop it was supposed to just be a website, but he's like, I can turn this into an app. And I was like, fucking go, bro. And it's just I went to Film Tools here in LA, and I metered every single light they had, like all the film lights. And, it kicks out like a graph that tells you the spectral reading of it. Right. Obviously CRI, TLCI, TM30, which is like this weird circle that just lets you know about hue shift. And the app is just going to let you compare, either just look at the results of a light or compare them.
Oh, interesting.
So like if you have mixed fixtures on your set, you can know like, okay, these two are going to match better than those two or whatever.
Right.
It was just supposed to be like a...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it was just supposed to be like a thing to kind of prove. It was for an article I was writing, because like the sky panel doesn't actually read that well. Like there are lights that are way more accurate than the sky panel. And so I just kind of wanted to prove that, because I kept saying it and I was like, well, I don't know if that's true. That's just hearsay. So I went and like metered them all, and like the aperture lights everyone's super into. Like some of them are good, but like some of them aren't that great, So I just wanted to be sure. I hate guessing.
I agree. It would be a fun tool. I mean, I remember I have an older, my color meter is really only 4 at this point, because I don't have what I think with the newer chips, they can read LEDs, like the newer color meters can read LEDs. So I have the one before that, it's the Konica C500, which I love, but I can't do LEDs with it. So it's in the back of my head. I could kind of meter it, but I'm like, okay, this is off by this amount. So it's more for HMIs, balancing HMIs and all that. But I've done that before. When I got it over a decade ago, I was metering everything, seeing like what kind of wattage bulb was below 3200 or what degree below 3200. It is super valuable. I do find that sky panels, I don't meter. I guess trusting the Kelvin in the back of the unit, what it says, I mostly trust it. When it comes to saturation index and using the color, I do feel like sometimes the rendering, depending on the camera you're using, is not quite the color that you're seeing. Yeah. And that's just, mixing of technologies at this point.
Yeah. Do you have a kind of a preference on camera? Because some people are super camera nerds. Other people don't really care, whatever's getting ordered.
I just, I typically prefer ARRI. ARRI is kind of my go-to. The Venice is a beautiful system. I used Venice 1 on a feature 2 years ago. I just used the Venice 2 and it was very impressive. It was really nice to upgrade incrementally. They didn't change too much, but it was everything that did change was really nice with the new Venice 2. And it's beautiful. So at this point, really between those two, I'm not too much of a red user in whatever capacity that is. I still haven't gravitated back towards the red from over a decade ago.
It's a hard system to jump into because it changes every year.
Right. I remember that one, you know, in 2010s, early 2010s, or even 2010. Yeah, that it would change every few months. Like they would change the interface, upgrade it, and all that stuff.
Yeah. So going back to Chaperone, how did you? I should ask this at the beginning, but how did you get involved in that project?
So Katie Schiller put me in with director. Katie Schiller was the producer on it. She put me in to interview with Sam Max, the director. I had a Zoom call with them after reading the script, and I thought it was phenomenal. It really beautifully written, really, really sensitively written as well. You just feel the weight of the whole script because it speaks to inescapable depression of a young man's seeking of release, essentially. And there's this mysterious character, the chaperone, that helps with that release. So I really wanted it. I thought it was beautifully written. With my interview with Sam, it went really well. You know, I sent Sam a film that I did previously with my friend. I got into South by 2021. So I was trying hard for it, and they landed on me, and I was very grateful. And I was very ecstatic to get into it and do all the prep work for it.
Yeah, it definitely fits your, self-proclaimed aesthetic of like stillness and moments of quiet. And
it definitely does. I mean, that film was very up my alley and my style. Like it's not like I had to stretch too much from my natural thinking and instincts, at least, which is, good and bad. Obviously you want to stretch those muscles a bit more. But it definitely, like, I had a good sense of it from the beginning, jumping into it.
Yeah. Were you guys storyboarding it at all, or was that more of a just kind of like, we're going to set this up on the day kind of thing? Or shot list?
Sam did little storyboards between our shot list and prep meetings, which was very helpful. So I would come to shot list like for the second or third time, and they did a little bit of storyboards, but it was mostly going through shot by shot and hammering in the mood and feel for each shot. And it took us longer than most short films. Like it took us 4 to 5 meetings. I would say 4 meetings and then a catch up on the 5th meeting to be like, okay, this is what we're doing. Right. Where usually it's like half the time for a short film, which was great because then we're really getting into the nitty gritty of talking about the minutia of like, certain blocking elements are just low versus high angle in like very small incremental ways.
Yeah. What was the shooting schedule? How many days were you shooting?
It was 3 shoot days.
Okay. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. It's typical for sure. Day 1 was very long. We started in Brooklyn at 4 a.m., but then we had a 2-hour commute at around 8 a.m. to Jersey to do the driving stuff. And the rest of it was being shot near there in Jersey. So that was a longer day. But yeah, three days.
Were you scheduling a really long drive just so you could shoot it along that road, or were you kind of like going back and forth? Or what
was just the next location. Like they got an Airbnb house, and it was in Western North New Jersey kind of thing. So we shot in Brooklyn 4 hours, loaded up, and then drove 1.5 hours, 2 hours to the next location to then do the driving stuff.
Right. Did you have to strip down the house when you got there, or was it already pretty bare?
I don't remember. I think it was pretty bare, actually. I think the production design elements were just kind of moving the furniture around a little bit, adding plastic, adding props, curtains. Yeah, it was mostly bare. It's like the guy knew we were shooting there. He was a cool guy, but it was very, very generic, kind of lonely Airbnb.
Yeah. Now, were you I might have blacked out when you just said this. Were you mostly lighting like from the outside, or were you tubing interiors, or all sort of reflection?
Trying to think. We have a bathroom scene at the end where I have like an M18 outside through a 4x4 grid, but mostly, a lot of the bedroom stuff was upstairs and there was no access. We're talking about 30 feet off the ground, and on a small budget, the time energy is. It didn't call for having window light come through. I did have actual natural sunlight come in, which was nice. Yeah. But it was just letting it play, putting negative fill off to one side. And then when I got to a close up of Russell in the bed, was 2 Helios tubes and a Kino housing fixture with diffusion, just to give him a little light on the side of the face from the window. And that's really it. And keep that negative fill up. So it was very simple. It was very, very simple.
That's good. Yeah. I was gonna say it's nice to hear because you always see something that looks really pretty, and you're just kind of like, obviously the goal isn't only to make pretty pictures, but when you do see something that's really pretty, and you're like, fuck, is that one of those like sneaky ones where it's impossible to get, or is it like, you know, two tubes and some neg?
I think a lot of cinematography comes down to a lot of experience happens when you start out. You think things have to be complicated because that looks better, right? And obviously simplicity has its own form of making things look great or even better than the complicated. So I think over time and experience, it's just learning those when you look at a scene and location, like, okay, simple is the way to go. Whether it be for looks and getting the best look out of it, or is it better for the actors and the director to actually work within the space and get the scene right for simplicity, you know, because sometimes once you throw up a menace arm, even if on your space where you can wheel it around, that menace arm could be a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Or if it's a space where you can't wheel it around, you're on carpet or something, it's like, well, how's this menace arm going to screw me up later on the next shot and cost time for either me, my crew, or the director?
Yeah.
So no, definitely the Chaperone was very simple. It was, which is fun to embrace because when you go into a short film, you're like, okay, these are my tools. I'll make it work. And you just go with it. And sometimes that's freeing in its own right.
Yeah. I mean, like I said earlier, like I'm actually a proponent of having certain limitations put on you, not ones that like fuck you up, but just ones that like you can work around easily, you know?
Right.
I think are helpful. I know you got a hard out here, so we'll just kind of have to skip to the end. Although I had a few other questions about like working with colorists and stuff, but maybe next time. I ask everyone the same two questions at the end, and they are: A, what's a piece of advice that you were given or you read somewhere or something, or just maybe a quote that has stuck with you as a cinematographer, as a filmmaker, and two, suggest a movie that isn't yours for people to watch.
Watching a lot of shows recently.
I mean, those have been shows are great.
I mean, shows. I mean, you're talking about it's not even related to cinematography at all. But I've been watching Big Mouth on Netflix, and I fucking love it.
That's a great show.
I mean, it just feeds into my comedy and dark humor greatly. So I'll say that. Not relating to cinematography at all because it's animated, but sure, I'll go with that.
Sure, that works.
What was the other one? Advice, either I heard or experienced. A lot of it. A lot of advice is already out there. What I'll say is that when you start out, film school or not film school, I don't think that matters. I don't think you need film school, but when you start out, it's the relationships you make along the way, but particularly with the ones that we're working most closely with. So when it comes to either if you're crewing your fellow crew or your directors, your producers, treat everyone with respect. It's not so much that obviously you don't know where people will go and come back at you if you had a good relationship with them, but just gaining the respect as someone that treats other people with kindness on set. And, you know, just having that, I think, is super valuable. You know, I mentioned I did my own short film earlier. It's like I have beautiful friendships and relationships. Like I pulled favors from my friends who I work with a lot, and they're more than willing to do it. And I love them for it. You know, it's just like having that relationship, being like, okay, and it makes everything easier on the day.
Yeah, no, literally, I would say 70% of the DPs I've spoken to have all mentioned some version of being kind as easily the most important factor.
I think it is. It's, and you know, if stuff does go wrong there, and hopefully it doesn't, it's not taking responsibility when you have to, or when you should, and not trying to find it elsewhere. It's like, okay, internalize it, deal with it, and be like, okay, no, you messed up. Or even if you didn't mess up, it's like, maybe you have to take the blame for whatever going around, even if it's wrongfully so, and just kind of dissipate and fix the situation and not make it more toxic.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot part of it. So it's a blend of everything.
Yeah. Coming up with a solution. And then, but that also comes with experience too, is like knowing when taking the blame for something, it won't matter, or where like, if someone tries to pin something on you and you're like, no, that'll ruin my career. You get fucked. That was not me, you know? Not that ever happens, but just knowing the difference. Not everything is going to ruin your career.
Right. It's experience. You know, it's I guess it's learning also when to put your foot down in certain scenarios.
Totally.
Especially for safety, of course. But sometimes it gets very complicated sometimes with safety, unfortunately. But it's knowing when to put your foot down.
Yeah.
It's sometimes very valuable.
Well, I'll let you get to your next thing. I hope your Sundance, what is it, a week? Sundance time is a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you. I think we got a week left or 6 days left. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time, man. That was a great conversation, and hopefully we can have you back.
Thank you, Kenny. Speak soon.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by ProVideo Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F&R Mattbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the podcast you've just heard by going to provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/owlbot, respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.